I'm Ben Ryman, and this is Behavior Speak. In this episode, I speak with returning guest Dr. Robin Arnall, assistant professor in the Applied Behavior Analysis program at Russell Sage Colleges, and Alexandra Elfers, a doctoral student at the Chicago School for Professional Psychology. Arnall and Elfers are both autistic behavior analysts and came together to create an assessment protocol designed for and by neurodivergent individuals called the Empowering Autonomy, a Skills Assessment Protocol. Available now from Sixth and Center Publishing. We explore the complexities of emotional needs, autonomy, and the importance of cultural responsiveness in behavioral assessments. We discuss the significance of understanding behaviors as expressions of unmet needs rather than mere disruptions, emphasizing the necessity of addressing these needs to foster genuine connections. The dialogue also highlights the dynamic nature of disability and the importance of flexibility and support strategies, advocating for a shift away from the rigid binary thinking in behavior analysis. All right, welcome everybody.
Is that for us? Is that our cue?
That's for you, yeah. Cue. That's your
Hello.
cue. Welcome.
We're autistic. You may have to spell it out.
Hi, glad to be here.
That's awesome. This is like the best welcome, hands down, ever.
The most awkward for sure. We do our best.
You're doing great. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge I'm producing this podcast in the lands of the Comox, Clay-Hoops, Homoko, and First Nations. I'm grateful to be here. Okay, well, let's start by just getting to know folks. Alex, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Alexandra Elfers. Changed my name so others might still know me as Vassar. I'm an autistic ADHDer. I hold a lot of the same diagnoses that I work with the individuals that I work with. I currently work in a group home setting for teens, with multi-system youth, so not all autistic individuals, but folks who've been passed around a lot. So that's kind of the world that I've dived into this year. Previously, I worked in primarily clinics or telehealth, but I've always gravitated towards teens and tweens. So that's the main subset of folks that I try to do my best to serve. I am a PhD student at the Chicago School. I actually just Wednesday got the email that IRB approved my thesis. So coming back into spring term, I'll start recruiting. I was like, with my advisor, decided against starting recruiting over Christmas. That seemed like a bad idea. So that's coming down the pipeline, which is exciting because it's another hurdle to jump on the pathway to a PhD. I'm also working, I'm trying to do things that bring me out of the ABA sphere and bring me into things that are pathways of joy for myself. So that means like writing poetry and quilting and games and my cats and stuff like that. I think I have this notion in my head that I want ABA and the work that I do in the field to be the least interesting thing about me, but I'm also a workaholic, so that's a new process of trying to like balance things out. Like, you're a little too invested. Maybe spread out a bit. So I don't know. That's a bit about me.
A little to unpack there. I know you want it to be the least interesting thing about you, but it's the thing I'm probably going to ask the most about.
Yep, that is totally fine. That's just a like tidbit of my current mental processing. We're on an ABA related podcast. Like that is going to be the most interesting thing to talk about today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to hear a little bit about your kind of origin story for getting into the field. How'd you get into ABA?
That is a bit of a loaded question because I do not like. This is one of my favorite like party tricks, I guess. Because I don't. Socializing, I was at a friend's thing last night, a going away party for work, and as soon as she left, I left because I was like, I don't know how to talk to these people, kind of
Relatable.
deal. But my undergrad's in physics, and so a lot of my worldview is really shaped by having participated in physics-based research. No publications. My undergrad thesis is in physics, but it was not a very illuminating thesis by any means. Then I spent time teaching overseas in China. And then when I came home, I did a substitute teaching for a while, and that is why I'm not a school-based BCBA, because that was a rough introduction to education in the States, because I taught overseas, but obviously a very different, and substitute teaching where I was teaching was and also I'm 4'11", so I would sometimes have school staff calling me out on like student rules that I should be aware of, like
Oh,
don't be
goodness.
in the office after school, and I'm like, I'm here to pick up my timesheet.
Wow.
And I did not go back to that particular school, but that year was really rough, and I am a psych survivor. That was what precipitated a lot of the psych care that I received shortly after that. Then I was like, oh, you know what? I love numbers. Let's try accounting. I don't know. Throw things at the wall, see what sticks. Bored me out of my mind. So boring. I'm like, I'm good at it, but I don't like it. And then I was considering going back into like sciences and engineering, but needed a job, any job kind of situation, and stumbled on like, well, I like kids. I've worked in education settings, got a BT role, and then I was like, that was kind of it because I love being around autistic people. And I had already had a like soft diagnosis at that time, but in my psych stays, a nurse practitioner had suggested and was advocating for an autism diagnosis for me, but the male psychiatrist overruled her and said non-men can't be autistic and it must be borderline or bipolar. And I'm like, features of those might be present, but I was put under some pretty heavy chemical restraint at the time. But coming into the autistic spaces and being around autistic kids, one of the first things I looked up is like, what does the autistic community think of ABA? And that was eye-opening and very different from what I got in my training, and very quickly got involved in the ABA reform movement, and got on into my master's program and that kind of thing. So it was like, okay, well, this seems like something that I'm good at and something that I can do and something I can contribute to my various communities. Use the analysis for good if possible. It's not a perfect journey. Like there are people like master's tools aren't going to destroy or like dismantle the system, but at the same time, harm reduction in fields that aren't realistically going anywhere is also important. So that's kind of where I ended up landing. Big shout out to Mel and Joe from the original ABA reform group, because they taught me a lot about what I do and how I do it. So I'm appreciative of them. Yeah, hopefully that's a somewhat clear answer.
It's super clear. Well, I feel like the answer to this question might open up some things you don't want to. And so if you just want to give me a general answer, that's cool too. But what do you mean by a psych survivor?
That is a whole topic, but I don't come at autistic advocacy from an autistic lens only. I come from a Mad Pride lens. That is like, I've been in Mad Pride circles, and what that means is like, it's logical to be mad or insane in our world. Like, it is a reasonable response, and I am not the most eloquent in talking about Mad Pride because it's not something I don't have it can be emotionally impactful to kind of dive into those spaces, and I lost a friend based on that challenge this year.
Sorry to hear that.
But psych survivorship is like, I've been incarcerated in mental health facilities. I've been put under chemical restraint. I've experienced, like, when I look at the medications the kids I'm serving are on, I know what those medications feel in my body. Mind you, I don't know what it's like in their body, but I've been under similar levels of chemical restraint as the people that I work with. I've had like doctors treating me like an unreasonable human being for being upset about their mistreatment and violating HIPAA, and like talking loudly about me and my symptoms in a lobby, but like I'm shut down and traumatized. Like I don't have the skills at that point. At that point, I was barely alive. So psych survivor is a way of kind of recognizing like psych care it's not care. It's ABA is a symptom of the societal issue of how we treat mad and disabled people. Not all disabled people are mad, but not all mad people. Well, I would say that most mad people are disabled in some way, shape, or form. How we define that, but I don't know if that answers that clearly either. But that psych survivorship is really important to me, and I don't come at ABA reform just from a low support needs white autistic human. come at it from an like we get so stuck on anti-ableism, like people can't handle the anti-ableism conversation. I'm coming at it from an anti-sanism conversation. And that's not a conversation that is had enough in our field, I don't think, because people, and that comes into like intellectual disabilities, cognitive disabilities. I have cognitive disabilities and things like that I acquired from chemical restraint that can alter your brain chemistry.
Sure.
So yeah, that's what that loosely
Beautifully
means.
done. I thought that was great.
Yeah, really good. No, you keep introducing new terms, so I'm going to keep asking more questions. Tell me a little bit about anti-sanism.
So ableism, kind of, or racism, sexism, all of that is like being against whatever that descriptor or identity or whatever label is. I don't care to be sane. And a lot of Mad Pride activists and advocates don't care to be sane. Why would I want to be like being sane? To a lot of Mad Pride activists is actual insanity versus like, and that phrasing is clunky, but I'm going to pull up. So surprisingly, the Chicago school has an anti-sanism stance, so I'm going to pull up what this says just so that I'm giving a less word salad explanation. So sanism, or also called mentalism, different than ABA's mentalism, is prejudice plus power. Anyone of any neurological condition can exhibit neurocognitive prejudice. Neurotypical people have the institutional power. Therefore, sanism is a systematized discrimination, antagonism, and exclusion directed against neurodivergent people based on the belief that neurotypical cognition is superior. Often stems from pathology paradigm, boils down to two fundamental assumptions. There's one right, normal, healthy way for human brains and human minds to be configured and to function, or one relatively narrow, normal range into which the configuration and functioning of human brains and minds ought to fall. If your neurological configuration and functioning, and as a result, your ways of thinking and behaving diverge substantially from the dominant standard of normal, there's something wrong with you. And that was provided by Nick Walker. Anti-sanism is strategies, theories, actions, practices that challenge and counter inequalities, prejudices, and discrimination based on neurocognitive conditions. So a sanist policy would be like if somebody experiences DID or they experience manic episodes, they need treatment. They are ill. An anti-sanist stance would be like, what supports do they want, if any, to navigate life safely? That doesn't like put aside like interpersonal boundaries, like there's complexity there, community engagement, and like but also I shouldn't have to worry about my therapist calling 911 on me and having me incarcerated if I'm experiencing psychiatric distress.
Sure.
Because ultimately that's going to put me back under chemical restraint and back in an incarcerated system, and it's going to cause me more harm, even if the intent is to help.
No, that's super clear. So there's kind of that parallel between neurotypical and neurodivergent, but it's
Power
more
dynamics.
kind of around, well, I think the concept of intellectual disability, the construct of psychiatric disorder, and
Broken system of psychiatric healthcare, especially in America.
A big soapbox for me is I hate when people are like, oh, narcissistic abuse. Like there are people who have the diagnostic label of NPD, narcissistic personality. Yeah, that's pathologizing. So like I don't, like if I've been abused or harmed by somebody, I make it a point to not use that descriptor because that's not accurate. It may be if a person has that clinical diagnosis, but there is hatred towards and bile towards anybody with NPD or with bipolar or with borderline personality or whatever like makeups that they get left out of the neurodiversity concept. Neurodiversity gets pinholed into autism and ADHD, and it's much broader than that. It's not meant to be limited to developmental disabilities. And at the end of the day, these other diagnoses, they're just labels that show somebody has trauma and that they have been greatly harmed, but instead we pathologize them as evil and bad and not deserving of relationship and connection because they're dangerous, and that's not okay.
Yeah. No, I think about a lot of the conversations I've had with some like Indigenous guests about sort of how, a lot of these psychiatric disorders didn't exist in their communities until colonization. Colonization
Mhm.
kind of created those disorders because they
Yep.
were a product of colonization. Not only in terms of sort of describing them from sort of that deficit-based versus strength-based approach, but also the actual neurological changes were a direct sort of effect of colonization, and specifically the trauma, and sort of both, direct trauma and intergenerational trauma, sort of playing that role. So yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense for sure. Do you have a credential with the International Behavior Analysis Organization, the Qualified Applied Behavior Analysis Credentialing Board, the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, or would like a certificate of attendance for another organization? You can earn continuing education units by going to www.behaviorspeak.com, clicking on CEUs, and entering the 3 secret words. The first secret word is sanism. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for describing some of those terms for folks. I think that's really helpful. I'm resisting rabbit holes for the sake of time, but I think we can have more conversations another time on this. So you're doing your PhD now, and your your dissertation passed the IRB. So is that what you said?
Thesis. So
Thesis, right?
unfortunately, the thesis I have written doesn't count because it's in physics, and my master's program did not have a thesis. It had a capstone literature review project. So TCS requires that you pass the master's level thesis before they allow you to go through to comps, and which they build into the program, which I'm doing.
It's pretty common.
So you eventually will do a dissertation, but right now you still have to do this master's thesis piece in order for it.
Yep.
To pass the criteria and so on.
But I should be done with that by March crossed, assuming everything goes smoothly.
Right.
I mean, it's not guaranteed, but that's the hope.
And what is it that you're looking to study in your thesis? And I'm guessing it's probably related to your dissertation too. So what's sort of the scope of the work you're looking to do at Chicago School?
So my primary interest is changing the behavior of behavior analysts. It's one possible focus on how reform and change and making something better can happen, but I think that there's a lot of conceptual articles that are we need compassionate care, we need this, we need that, which are great, but where's the research to say let's change? I see articles about changing how BCBAs interact with parents, or how we train trainees, or how we train RBTs or parents around that, but I don't see a whole lot of specifically changing the cognitive dissonance issues within behavior analysts to be able to hear autistic feedback or any population's feedback really other than their own. So my area of interest, I have other interests in research as well, but my area of interest is using relational frame theory, particularly deictic framing, as a intervention tool to reduce, for the scope of my thesis, I'm looking at fundamental attribution error or correspondence errors, which would be I'm watching the Joker and I presume the actor behind the Joker is a villain. Because, or whatever movie or whatever, you're in class and you're assigned to read pre-written scripts, but your class, you read one that you really disagree with, but you do a good job delivering it, and your classmates perceive you to actually believe what you said, even though everybody knows you were assigned to read a script at random, you didn't choose it. So I'm trying to see if that concept can help with baby steps. So I'm trying to use my thesis and dissertation as tools to get towards the actual meat of what I want to do, but I'm doing foundational steps in the direction of what I want to do after dissertation. But does reducing fundamental attribution error help BCBAs tolerate negative or critical feedback about ABA? That's kind of the long-term goal, and what other interventions can help behavior analysts in that regard. Because if we're not doing the work ourselves to change our own behavior towards the people that we are claiming to serve, and we're not really willing to put our own behavior under the same microscope that we put kids under and parents under, then what right do we have to be doing any behavior modification whatsoever? We don't understand the weight of the blunt instrument we're wielding if we don't ever experience it ourselves.
Yes.
Really cool. Okay, Robin, repeat guest. Sweet. Welcome back.
It's cool to be back, but it's also strange to be back. I feel like I don't usually have that much to talk about. I'm here.
Why don't you tell us a little about yourself, Robin, for a refresher for folks?
For lack of, just going through everything again, just in case, because I don't want to, repeat anything from before. I'm a full-time professor at the Russell Sage College ABA program, which I get to do a lot of really cool things with integrating reform perspectives and stuff like that. So I really love getting my hands into that coursework and really modifying a lot of that. So if you know any students who are looking for a program, send them to me because I love to change their perspectives and, do all of that. I also adjunct for the Chicago School where Alexandra is pursuing their PhD. I chair research projects, but obviously for conflict of interest, I'm not working on Alexandra's project, but I work with a lot of the students who come in and they're like, I'm wanting to do something regarding ABA reform. And so they seem to find me on the list of faculty and I get to work with them, which I love. Doing the research projects with students and getting them through the program is just like the coolest part of it, in my opinion. So I wish I could do more of it. Yeah, I got out of practice a few years ago, so I'm not practicing currently as far as supporting learners, but I have been doing research and collaborating with students. I provide supervision for practicum through the Chicago School as well. I'm trying to think of what else. I'm also a psych survivor. Alexandra and I have had a lot of unpacking conversations about a lot of this. And I had kind of a similar path where I found ABA, but I wasn't diagnosed. I suspected, but got met with a lot of really harmful ideas and, ableism against actual diagnosis, which led me to a whole lot of health issues physically and mentally. And it's funny, I ended up going off a lot of medications once I got diagnosed with autism because I was like, wow, okay, now it all makes sense. Now I just have to work off this framework. And I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say the clouds parted. Once I finally got that validation, things just made way more sense. And I was just like, man, I could have avoided so much crap if I had just had the right person with the right understanding all along. But here we are. And so I'm also pretty upset at the system. Yeah, I think Alexandra did a really great job kind of expressing all of that way better than I could ever do. So I'll just kind of leave on that.
Curious, but a couple things just about your work at Russell Sage. So it sounds like, I mean, you're a full professor there, so it sounds like they've been pretty welcoming for you to do this kind of work. And I wonder if that seems maybe possibly atypical, considering some of the other conversations in our field. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience and how you're supported?
Yeah, well, I think we have really great faculty, which is step one. We are all pretty compassionate, pretty respectful of each other's views and everything. And I think that, we've definitely had some loose conversations more or less about the culture of not only the discipline, but what we want to encourage within our program at Russell Sage. And it's been pretty positive. There are moments where I'm like, man, I thought we were further than this, but I remember that I myself in my journey am at a different place than others will be. And so, it's been really cool because you can have the foundation and you can teach the foundational basics, but you don't have to do them the way we've always done them. And that's the thing. It's like, I'm wanting to make sure you understand the material that's in your Cooper book because that's what you're going to be examined on. And I want you to pass, but I also want you to understand that these are complex concepts that just because you've seen them done one way doesn't mean it's right. You can take that same concept and do it in a different way. For instance, I think we might have talked about functional analyses. I don't love functional analyses. Have rarely, if ever, found that my results from a functional analysis that I've conducted in practice actually reflects real life for my learners that I've supported. I've constantly, and this was even before I was diagnosed, I would constantly have this thought, how would I respond in a very structured functional analysis setting? And then the only conclusion I could ever come to was it would be so awkward for me that I would not behave typically. And so you wouldn't get accurate information from me because I'm sus as to what's going on. You've broken my pattern, put me into a situation where all of a sudden reinforcement is freely flowing. It's confusing because you're breaking the rules. Like, none of it makes sense to me. So, whereas I can respect the practice and, everything that's come from it and whatnot, I also understand that, that concept can be applied in a different way that is not as extreme, experimental, maybe the word I'm looking for. Because, yeah, I think we lose a lot of the person, the context, and all of the extras about that behavior once we make it experimental. And yeah, so that's just one example I can think of. So I teach the concept of FAs, but I'm also saying, how would you do this different? What would you do to make this specific to the learner? Were you comfortable? What I do is I have my students role play the different parts within an FA. So they're not actually doing an FA on a client. They're doing FAs on each other, which I think is important for perspective taking because most of them haven't put themselves fully in the seat of a learner that they're supporting, who they're supporting, I'm sorry. And so I asked them to reflect on that. It's like, okay, what was your experience when you were the learner and someone was running an FA on you? And most of them say it was so weird. It made me think twice about ever considering doing this to a learner. I really appreciate this and I will always remember this assignment. And it's one of the things that when I see students at graduation, they're like, man, I hated that assignment at the time, but it was so helpful as far as shaping what I want to do in practice. And I will never forget it. So, there are ways that we can use those strategies and teach the concept, but also not have it become like, well, this is just the way we've always done it. And that's where we kind of get into a lot of harm is complacency, and we don't want that. So yeah,
Really
I don't
cool.
know. The culture's been pretty good about the flexibility and whatnot. As long as we're teaching the concepts, that's what's important. But yeah, they've been really great.
That's awesome. And it sounds like you're getting students that are sort of interested in some of these topics. And so does that suggest that maybe we're going to start to see some more maybe research being published that sort of talks about sort of different ways of doing ABA? I know that's some of the work you folks are doing, which we're going to get to later, but are you getting the feeling that there are that this is building and, beyond sort of, the social media conversations and now into academia and sort of other settings?
I would hope so. I got into reform after Alexandra did, but, good grief, it's been almost 5+ years for me now. In that amount of time, there are definitely glimmers here and there. This work is really difficult. And I'm just going to preface with that because you think you're stepping forward and then you'll have a major backward stepping happen. And it can be really discouraging. We are especially sensitive to some of those contingencies because they seem personal. They also can apply to situations that we've been a part of that bring up trauma. And so it can be especially daunting for us to have those setbacks, but I'm getting more students interested. A lot of students come to, I can speak for Russell Sage in that program because I teach more of the first semester courses. I've embedded a lot of content about what is ableism, what are simple things, behaviors that we may engage in that are ableist or could be ableist to somebody. And most students have never even heard the term. And I find that so disturbing because to me, it's just one of the isms. It's like racism or, sexism or whatever. Ableism's included in that. But most students are like, man, I didn't even know there was a term for this. That is wild. And so we have to kind of start from ground zero in that regard. And, I think that with a lot of our first semester courses, I'm seeing more and more students saying, hey, I'm trying to make ripples. I didn't know this was an issue, but now that I know, I'm not going to do things like this or that or whatever. And so I ask them for like objective steps. Like, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to always get a step from my learners. I'm not going to put my hands on them unless they are cool with it for me to prompt them through something. I'm going to teach them about their body and autonomy. And I love seeing those things. Like once in a while, I feel like we have a little harder time getting through learning history, but for the most part, it's pretty good. And I'm definitely seeing more research interest as far as, like you were saying, the application of some of these concepts and modifying what we're doing just from the same old nonsense that we've done just because it's just what we've always done. It's easier. It's comfortable.
Well, that's encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you two meet?
Oh, goodness. That's a lot too. Do you want to start off on that one?
Yeah, I think I met Robin in the ABA reform group in some of the discussions that were had
Yeah.
at the point that I was one of the admin members of that team. And then, Robin, you asked for a few people to step
Mhm.
into a panel discussion for ARC-ABA, Arkansas
Yeah.
ABA.
and I'm on the board for that. So I had a good position to make those decisions.
And so that was in 2020 that we did that panel. And then we have done a few presentations at between ARC-ABA and Milestones up in Northern Ohio with Oswin Latimer from who does fantastic
for
work.
Neurodivergent Minds.
Just kept working together, and then we also nerd out over Minecraft. So it kind of evolved from professional only to, and we got to meet this year at ARC-ABA in person. Like, we've known each other for
years
now, but we actually got to meet in person, which was very cool.
Very surreal, because we were so used to digital. It was like, oh wow, you exist.
We're people.
We are real people.
Yeah.
That facial recognition thing, it's just, it took me a minute.
Yeah.
So when did you start kind of doing more collaborative work together, sort of beyond the panels?
Pretty much immediately, I feel.
Yeah.
Because we clicked pretty well.
Yeah.
And we were already talking about ideas, and we had connected. Well, at the time, I was starting to go through the diagnostic process because I hilariously moderated that panel, which looking back was so cringy for me because I didn't know what I was doing. And also I'm super awkward. And so like I look back, and I don't know if you remember this about the panel, but when I started asking questions and everything, Oswin was like, it's actually really helpful if you kind of like tell us our names and who you expect to respond. And so Oswin was like so gracious and guiding me through the process of how to moderate. And I was just like, thank you. I'm so clueless here. So I look back on that and I think, man, like if you didn't know I was on the spectrum, that could be a pretty good indicator for diagnostics. And so, once I got diagnosed, I was like, you know what? Now I'm angry. Let's fix things, or let's, do what we can.
Yeah.
And it was pretty quick. We started talking about different ideas and just organically.
And started doing research together because you asked me to do some IOA for a study that you were working on.
Right.
Which was around that time, which also didn't get published in a like mainstream ABA journal.
I rarely do.
That it got rejected there too, but then Shane ended up publishing it in
Seven Dimensions.
And then we have a lot of projects in the pipeline and ones that are already like done or ones that are underway that just we've gotten to a habit of like, hey, I have this idea. Do you want to work on this together?
List of ideas.
Never-ending ADHD spiral of there's so much to do.
Well, and I never even ask anymore. I'm just like, hey, I'm doing this thing. I assume you're in. And like, it's just how we are now.
Yep.
Because our values are pretty aligned when it comes to research and practice and ethics and, a lot of that. So I feel that we have a pretty good understanding at this point.
I would hope so.
I mean, I'll tell you if not. I'm direct, but
same.
Yeah. But that's pretty much where we're at.
Well, I brought you on initially to talk about this assessment protocol that you folks had put together. Can you give me a little bit of a history of sort of maybe starting with why you wanted to create something like this and maybe some of the work that went into it?
I can kind of preface with that a little bit. I teach and I coordinate a functional behavior assessment course with SAGE. One thing that, and I want to make it very clear, I'm not bashing any of the other assessment protocols. That is not my intention. That is not what I'm about. I think there's space for everybody in this field. My thought process was, I want some representation as far as neurodivergence for assessment protocols, because I felt that going through some of the different criteria, I would never meet some of it. And it's like, is this realistic for somebody who is just wanting to survive day to day with the least amount of resistance possible? And so I basically thought, this could be something that might have some value. I definitely look at it now, and I'm sure we'll get to it, and think, these are things I should be working on and tracking for myself. But, it basically just came from a place of, these skills are missing. These are important to someone like me, someone like Alexandra, or, another person that I can think of off the top of my head who's neurodivergent as well. They aren't represented. And also, the measures may not fully be as realistic. Context was a big thing as well that I felt was not always accounted for. And so that was something that we really wanted to emphasize. So I don't know if you want to add any to that.
Yeah. I think I'm in agreement with what you shared, but there's also the like how many of the assessment protocols that we have are written by old white men about
Oh,
young white
yeah,
men,
fact.
white boys from a neurotypical ableist
Typical
sadist
autism
lens
perspective.
of like I work with some TRICARE families as a side contract role, and every 6 months I have to do the PDDBI for all of them, and we know about the TRICARE studies about how ABA is not doing what it says it does, which is true, and the thing that TRICARE wants ABA to do is also not good. We shouldn't be good at erasing somebody's identity.
Right.
We should be good at empowering a person to live life on their own terms and identifying what those terms are. Like, oh, nobody's given me the freedom to make a choice for myself, so I don't even know what I want. I'm just going to tell you what I think you want to hear. So from my end, it's kind of like what you said, Robin, about like there's enough space for everyone. I think there are some people who probably shouldn't practice anymore. So I
I
don't
would
think that
agree
there's
with
space
that.
for everyone.
I'm hoping they will hear us, though.
And like if we like this is a bit I come from a very like I innately like from my response to a lot of trauma in my childhood is perfectionism, which is emblematic and symptomatic of my own white supremacy culture and upbringing that I regularly need to challenge in myself. And my OCD stems from I'm not going to say or do any of my ideas until I know I can do it perfectly without causing any harm. But we're human and that's never going to happen. And so there's enough space for people to be like, we get stuck in this space of like, well, these are the assessments that we have that insurances allow. Comments I saw about the assessment. I think you posted, Ben, about it in one of the neurodivergent behavior analyst pages, whatever, on Facebook. And one of the comments that came out was like, where's the studies validating this protocol? And in my mind, I'm like, that's a good question.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
how are we going to have new, better tools if nobody ever just does them? And then we
Bingo.
do the research as we go, because that's how new things in science happen. Like ABA, this is a soapbox of mine coming from physics. ABA claims to be a hard science. No one can convince me that that is true, based on my own like lived experience and history. And I have fun with that conversation when somebody in the field challenges me, because I'm like, really, you're not going to convince me, but this is comical. But when we refuse to build new things because it doesn't automatically come with the like evidence that a very particular subset of evidence demanded by a system that is not doing well, then how are we ever going to progress? We can't. So like, I don't think that we should be the only one writing new assessments. I think more assessments need to be written. More people need, and not from a pathology paradigm assessment. Like, how do we assess and provide community care to our kin, whomever those kin are? So that's what I
Kin.
had.
That's great. Folks, kin, y'all.
Yeah.
I love it.
The OG gender inclusive terms
Yeah.
that
Well,
kind
I'm
of
trying to do that too. Like, I noticed that a common thing to say in society is, hey guys, which I'm trying to completely abolish and remove from my vocabulary. Once in a while, one creeps out, but kin is a great alternative to that. That's, not gender specific or focused on the patriarchy, which we're trying to burn down to the ground. I digress.
let the dumpster fire take it out. Anger is a very valid emotion and is sanest to be against expression of anger. So when people get described as aggressive or angry, I'm like, yeah, I have good reason to be. You not
It's an
being angry
emotion.
is an issue. To me, I think you're the one that needs to do some reckoning.
So how does this particular protocol maybe differ from others then?
Oh, go ahead.
So it's loosely in the title is the autonomy feature. Like so much of different assessments are focused on somebody else determining what is best for an individual. Somebody else saying there's one right way to greet you. There's one right way to acknowledge somebody's initiation. There's one right way to be, and there's not. And so coming from the lens of like nothing in this book is going to be universally applicable. Nothing in this book, in this protocol, is going to be the same across every individual or every individual in the context of their community. But it can the person like autonomously navigate? Do they know what they want? Can they? This is a big goal that is not explicitly said in the book, I don't think, but in my practice and when I tell RBTs or DSPs or whomever I'm working with, one of my goals with my clients is for them to be able to tell me to F off, that I've made them mad, that like
Yeah.
they don't like me. Like you don't owe me, like I don't get my ego and my like self-esteem from children, from teens, from families. I get that on my own terms. So yeah, flip me off. If I did something that pissed you off, let me know. And having so when like I work with kids that curse and staff are like, we need to punish them for cursing. I'm like, no, yell louder. Contextually, like no, like your audience and where you're at in the context. But at the same time, like, hey, this therapeutic environment should be safe for you to say what's on your mind. But a lot of ABA and a lot of assessments are geared towards masking and requiring masking. I think there's a lot to be said around, like, there are situations based on safety that some individuals, the higher support needs you have, the color of your skin,
Yes.
the culture you come from,
Socioeconomic
that
status. Yeah.
makes masking necessary to stay alive. I don't like that. I don't want to see that, but it's absolute hubris coming from the low support needs autistic community, white autistic community, to say that masking is the problem. It's how it is forced and taught. So I might teach somebody masking if that's how they autonomously choose to navigate their day to day, with the
Or it
informed
keeps them
consent of,
alive.
hey, how do you reckon with this complex issue, and giving that autonomy. Not giving, you can't give autonomy. Like, well, I don't know why they're so mad at me. Did you ask them? No, I never thought of that. Seriously?
And shockingly,
Okay.
that gets you a better relationship in the long run than forcing your
Yeah.
own decisions and will. Go imagine, right?
Yeah. So that's kind of the difference from my perspective, is the length and the paradigm and foundation that we're coming from. A lot, like, there's a verbal behavior section. There's stuff in there about banding and tacting and intraverbals and all it is an ABA protocol. It is. We can't and shouldn't shy away from that, because that'd be misleading. It is meant for use in an ABA setting, but it shouldn't be limited to that. And it is hopefully again, my focus on changing the behavior of behavior analysts. If we give new language and new frames for how to have conversations around different challenges, we might see change happen.
Beautifully said. Objectively, we do have some different inclusion as far as what we've included in our assessment as well, which I'm actually really proud of.
Mm-hmm.
We have a mediator skill section, kind of, Alexandra was talking about, let's change what we do as mediators or support individuals or people who just happen to be in this individual's environment, because nobody's exempt from that because you're a part of their main character plot line. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's really important for us to know that you are also assessing your own skills as somebody in that environment, in addition to just assessing the skills of the person you're providing the support to, because that piece is commonly left out. And so we've tried to make those skills pretty broad to account for context as well, and just kind of encouraging the autonomy piece, because that's so unfamiliar as well to a lot of practitioners. The longer you've had your practice, or the longer you have that learning history, the more difficult that probably might feel. Some of the things that Alexandra was kind of describing as far as examples of skills, I want this to happen. That's going to be really uncomfortable for somebody who's practiced for 20 plus years. And, even if you have the best intentions, that's hard because it's behavior change. And we know that behavior change just doesn't happen from talking about it. It also is practice and rehearsal and feedback and all of that. And so we include that piece, which I love. But then we also have a social validity measure. And so that is the piece as well that we say, okay, now we're looking at what your mediator did or the person in your environment did, what we're working on, what you've hopefully work to self-identify as something that's important to you in your environment to work on. And now we want to know how you feel about all of it. Of course, keeping in mind that communication may look very different for everybody and may have to be modified into a format that is easy to understand by individuals on the receiving end of that communication. And then we include just kind of an overview of, here are some barriers that could occur systematically, generally, is what we try to focus on. And I actually just thought of a couple more. We're actually in the process of making a to-do list for a revised version. And so we already have some really good ideas for this, and I'm excited about it, but I'm not going to talk about those until we actually get those going.
Yep.
I've just pocketed away a couple of barriers to modify and add to that list as well. But those are kind of, if we're looking for tangible pieces that are different, those are probably
Mhm.
the big ones, I think.
Yep. And the social validity and mediator score sheet, those areas in particular, so I think that a lot of this I don't know how this will land, but I think that a lot of the changes in the Ethics Code 2.0 were in part lip service, but I have no qualms with making them be more substantive than that. And one of those changes was separating out the meaning between client or actual person receiving your care and stakeholders, which that term has always, like, I get why it's the one used, but it rubs me the wrong way.
Me
But
too.
people that are not the actual client, like, well, I'm targeting eye contact because the parents want it. They're the client too. Like, there's an element of truth to that and contextual, like, cultural responsiveness and that kind of thing too. But just because something is culturally relevant doesn't mean that it's not causing the individual being put under that pressure, pain, or harm. And so how do you balance that conversation? And like, I don't see a whole lot, like, even in the course of like looking literature review for my thesis and in the future dissertation and just any of our projects and ideas and things like that, I don't see a whole lot of social validity from the actual client. Like, there is very little that I have seen. And
It's
I
everyone
am a big
around.
fan of like changing your opinion when you get new information. So that being said, always open to correction. Like, if there is that research out there that I'm just not seeing in ABA specifically, that is actually like a early intervention that includes social validity measure from the actual kid. There's going to be social validity maybe from the parents and the teachers and whomever, but why does the opinion of the child not matter? Why is the opinion of the child not even considered? Which is leftovers, and that's how Lovas and his
It's an
methodology has
afterthought.
a chokehold on, like, there's so much in our field that people, well, Lovas isn't the father of ABA. Functionally, he is a father of the autism industrial complex. He is. We can't explain that away. We can't ignore that. No, he isn't the founder of ABA, but as services provided, he is a large component of where we're at. Even today, our journals won't retract his work.
Right.
Even some of his work and his compatriots that ended in somebody dying, right? And not finding life worth living anymore, you know? Like, we need, like, not only do we need to change our behavior, part of a skill deficit BCBAs have is looking for feedback from the actual person that is in need of something, right?
Let it
But
serve a prompt in the
yeah,
assessment protocol for,
yeah,
hey, maybe I should start doing this all around.
get their feedback.
Yeah.
If I bring ideas to kids, and I often preface it with like, you might hate this. It's okay if you do. I'll go back to the drawing board, whether you find that drawing board boring and don't want to participate until I have new ideas, or you want to sit down and do some of it with me. And I've had a mix of both types of responses from a variety of individuals, including non-speaking individuals, speaking individuals, you know, folks with intellectual disabilities. Like, I've had that collaboration with kids about, like, here's what we're going to try as an idea. If you hate it, I go back to the drawing board. That's fine. No sweat off my back. I'm here to support you. And if it isn't workable for you, it's not workable. And I'll have that advocacy and support conversation with parents where they're like, well, this is the only way it's going to work. And then we can have that hard conversation of, okay, how do we come to the middle where you feel supported, your child feels supported.
But we're
But I'm
also
not the
not
practitioner
forcing
that
those
targets,
ideas.
like, I'm not going to do something just because a parent demands it. But at the same time, I'm not going to throw out what the parent cares about and needs. Like, I'm going to try to investigate and find out what their actual underlying need is, and how do we meet that without crossing what I professionally find to be boundaries or limitations in what I'm willing to do, you know?
And I want to be clear, like, we're not going to tell a parent we're not going to work on self-injury or something like that. Like, we are
People conflate
definitely,
that so much.
yeah. And so I want to get to that before somebody would be snarky about it. Like, we don't want anybody getting hurt, period. Other people, the individual themselves, whatever. So that is never
Yeah.
something that we're like, well, let's just dismiss that.
I've learned a lot from gentle parenting, also known as responsive parenting, collaborative parenting folks. I'm not a parent, so I know that's an area that I
Same.
need to listen to people who have experienced parenting, and I do, and that's been a common practice. But people conflate gentle, that whole with permissive. I am not a pushover. There has been a situation where a kid's engaging in aggression and self-injury because I had to force at the drop of a hat a transition to a tornado room because I live in an area where there's tornadoes. We're going to the tornado room. I care about you. We are going to get there whatever way we need to get there, but I can do that without restraining you. I can do that without using punishment. I love and care for you. We are going to make it to the safe area. And it's going to be hard and it's probably traumatic for both of us. And that sucks. But we're going to the tornado room. I'm not a pushover. At the same time, if I'm being too rigid, like I remember one time a kid that I had inherited his care had a like token system from a prior BCBA and he did not want to let it go. It was like, that is what I use here. And that was uncomfortable for me because I'm like, I don't think this is helping you. I think this is not being, and at the end of the day, he was able to fade out because they moved and mom didn't use it at home. Mom used something different. But in the clinic, he was like, in the clinic setting, that is what I use. I will not part from it. And I'm like, that is your autonomous, like, I'm going to honor that. And there might be times where I'm autistic too. I might be being rigid. So you know what? If I'm being too rigid about something, I'm going to own up to it. And be like, hey man, for whatever reason, like I'm human, I was in a mood. Sorry about that. Here's, this repair that like I was in the wrong and I'm gonna model that.
BCBAs tend to be pretty rigid too.
But I agree. I'm glad you brought it up, Robin, because like if self-injury is happening, I'm not going to let you hurt yourself. Like I've worked with kids who are having some sort of medical like seizure, migraine, whatever that is eliciting that self-injurious head-directed behavior. I'm not going to let you hit your head through the wall. I'm not going to allow it. But I can do that without using restraint. I can do that while being kind and supportive. I can do that. Like I had a kid who was in that moment and I just said, hey, bud, I really have to protect your noggin. Your noggin's important. Younger kid. And he like paused and asked why. And then went back, and nobody had ever explained to him why they were being hands-on. So I'm gonna explain. I'm not just gonna say no and that's it. Like, not a pushover, but at the same time, like people conflate the self-injury and aggression conversation with stimming. And I'm like, those are two different boxes. You handle them very differently.
Yeah.
Same framework, but very differently. Like we don't need to be like, well, if they never learn to take no and change their behavior for the stim, how are they going to know not to hurt themselves? I'm like, I had a BCBA last year make a comment that like, it's a short line between, and this was a comment from a male BCBA that said something to the effect of, it's a very short pathway from allowing stims because it's fun and letting somebody pee all over the floor. And I'm like,
no, that's
ableism and sanism on your part. I don't consent to this conversation because that's wild assertion.
Well, and if you take a low topography behavior, like to be clear, I engage in self-injurious behavior. I pick my skin to the point where it's just like repulsive, it bleeds. And like if you looked at my nails right now, you would be horrified. But I also know that if you took that away from me, I would probably do something worse. And that's the thing is like, I've had this conversation with so many students and supervisees and all of that. And they're like, I want to target this behavior. And it's like a low magnitude behavior. And it's like, but if you do that, you're running the risk of getting a higher magnitude behavior, similar to like what you would experience with an extinction burst, because you're not actually meeting the need because you may not understand that need. So like me picking my skin is never going to be a zero behavior. And I just have to accept that. Knowing that it's never going to be as what I call as no zero behavior, it's going to exist. But what I need to do is figure out the ways that I can reduce that injury to myself and autonomously implement them. And so I put press-on nails on, I make sure that I use lotion, I, do all these different things. And if I find myself in a moment where I'm engaging in this automatically reinforcing behavior, which no one can explain but myself, to be clear, I have to work on those systems myself. And if we're not doing that for the learners who we are providing support for, especially for stereotypy, for stemming, whatever you want to call it, you are not meeting those needs and you are not finding an alternative replacement. And most of the time, you may not be able to find an alternative replacement. The only thing you can do is increase that response effort or reduce the injury that's happening. And so, we talk about helmets, and Alexandra was talking about, head banging or injury to the head and stuff like that. So, if that's never going to be a zero behavior, you just do what you can to keep them safe. And so,
And
go ahead.
I chuckled because I forgot to get some fidget toys out. So I've been picking my nails
ready.
as we've been talking.
We both do it. I was self-disclosing. I wasn't going to disclose you though.
No, you're good. Yeah, that's why that's a stim of mine. And sometimes it's sensory because I don't like the process of the cuticles. And I also hate painting my nails. I don't like the manicure process and that kind of thing. So I have to have some simple manicuring tools myself. I make it a weekly routine to use my cuticle clippers to make sure that there's not skin hanging off, because that's where that starts to come from. But that has taken me, I spent most of, and there's still times where I'm walking around with all of my fingers in band-aids because, I had an anxious moment and now they need aftercare. Learning those types of things, it's not going to be zero. But so much of ABA with the functions, a limitation of them is it's not getting at the need. And the underlying need is often treated as a mentalist idea. And I'm like, that falls into that sadism, right?
Symptom.
And this again comes from my physics background. Matter can neither be energy can neither be created nor destroyed, and I have found that to be a fairly good analogy for behaviors, moods, whatever. The energy, the emotion, the anger, the need is there. We can't just distinguish it or extinguish it. We might be forcing somebody to mask and to shut down, and so it might look on the outside that hey, success, this person knows how to say, hi, I'm fine, and how are you? Yes, I would like to go do that. That roboticness. And I've seen that a lot where a person doesn't know what they want because they've been barred from knowing themselves. And that was true for me for a long time. I'm a recovering people pleaser. I have a playlist full of F-off songs to remind myself when I'm feeling people pleasery and feeling that rejection sensitive dysphoria and all of that stuff. No, you matter. There was I lost a thread there for a second.
I do too.
The need doesn't go away because we change the topography of the behavior. But hey, if the need is based on something in the environment that we could change so that the function of the behavior is no longer needed to begin with, hey, that results in behavior change too. And we haven't forced somebody to perform to our standards to appear okay and healthy. We've actually addressed the need. So if a kid is screaming and we put screaming on extinction, but they're screaming because they've been neglected and they're not being attended to. Humans, I have glumped onto the connection seeking over attention seeking, but in the last year I've kind of why do we we demonize different mental health diagnoses and things like that? Why do we demonize attention? Attention is a prerequisite for survival. We demonize attention seeking, but all of my Instagram posting is attention seeking. I live alone with 7 cats. Of course I'm attention seeking. Why is that bad? Okay, so let's give quality connection and attention, and then hey, that screaming is no longer necessary because the need is met. Rather than, hey, stop screaming, I'm only going to talk to you when you're not screaming. Then we're not talking to them when they need the attention.
Well, and when we repress some of those, I like to call it energy because that's just how I feel. It's I get this, anxious energy, or I automatically reinforcing whatever you want to, potato. But, if that energy doesn't come out in some way, shape, or form, and someone makes me just basically shut it down and ignore it, that's a trauma response. And so dissociation becomes a thing. And basically, we don't want to pile issues on top of something that's a non-issue. So kind of looping back into the assessment protocol. And we have a separate section for sensory, which we've tried to kind of leave pretty open and broad, where we talk about just identifying those needs and how we can respond to our needs and what we can do to respect others' needs for sensory seeking or defensiveness or whatever. And And so that's really hard for a lot of us, especially the longer that we've went until diagnosis and an understanding of how we actually engage and interact with the environment, the more difficult it is. So that section I'm constantly referring back to, and it's like, is this a need that I actually need to be identifying? Is this something that I need to find a better replacement behavior for, And so some of them may be ongoing too. And that's okay. It should never just be a check off the boxes and
Yep.
we're cured, ta-da, we're normal. Life isn't like that, and the world is not set up that way. And unless we basically challenge those norms, I think my cat just fell off the desk with the bed. Wow, okay. But unless we challenge those, the world will never change. It'll just stay the same. And we don't want that. We're very much like, let's change the world. But, we'd love for people to join us. That'd be great.
The energy thing. I know that gets shot down as mentalistic and what have you, but I'm like,
it's the best way to describe
the
it for me.
Western philosophy of what is evidence is not the end all be all. It's not. So I frankly don't care. That might get me in trouble with some people or get me on, like, don't listen to this person talk because they're mentalistic. But I'm like, I don't care. You have your opinion and your expertise. I have mine. I'm not responsible for yours. You're not responsible for mine. But we do share certifications. So there is a responsibility to each other to make us all be practicing under best practice. So I'm not going, again, not a pushover. So you can't convince me that ABA is a hard science. You can't convince me that extinction is ever useful in the way that ABA prescribes it. You can't, and I will not comply with those notions. And that's my way of resisting without being too antagonistic, because I am prone to that. Like, the more I suppress how I'm feeling, the more sharp my words, and that's natural.
Ben's like, this is what I get for asking two autistic people on the podcast. We get tangents all around.
You make it easy for me.
We love a good tangent.
It's more the resistance to sort of turn this into a completely different conversation.
Yep.
I'm going to save talking about my cuticles for another time, but because I was relating to everything you both were saying there as well. The second secret word is autonomy. Two pieces, all the pieces you were kind of focusing on are fascinating. I was really thinking a lot about the autonomy piece and the mediator piece in this protocol. I think we're often trying to shape folks into being versions of ourselves with a lot of these sort of assessments and protocols that are out there. And to your point of them being sort of neurotypically designed and often designed by folks that kind of fall more into my demographic. And they don't, and while they certainly can provide, some basic skills that, I think some of these behavioral cusps, as they were, that can be, really valuable for you to then make your own choices about new things you want to learn later on. We also tend to teach some skills that are maybe less valuable and don't put someone in a place where they can sort of make their own decisions and make their own choices, which really makes them struggle in the real world when they're trying to sort of connect with people from so many different backgrounds and so many different cultures and so many different areas. And so I like that piece because I think that's related to a lot of the feedback we've had. And then the mediator piece I think is great. I mean, I think we don't do enough to sort of beyond our 40-hour RBT course to sort of train our folks how to work with someone. Certainly, I mean, there should be supervision, there should be coaching, there should be all those sorts of things. But to sort of embed in each skill the role of that mediator, I think is super important, because how I learn to do something is so much based on my teacher. And we hear that time and time again, people remembering those good teachers, remembering those bad teachers. And so I love that you include those pieces. Can you tell me a little bit about how you've seen the protocol in practice, including maybe some of the feedback you've had from others?
Yeah.
Do you want to dive in, or do you want me to?
I can start. I know you'll have some really great thoughts though too. With the mediator skill piece in particular, I have received a lot of feedback as far as how flexible it is. We tend to think of it just as I am the RBT, I am implementing this protocol, but people have used it for caregiver and parent sessions. I think of it as a really good supervisory aid. If you're working and providing supervision for anybody in an ABA master's program or pursuing RBT certification, I think that this is a really great opportunity for that. It's also a really good opportunity for you to role reversal with the learner themselves. And if you have a learner, I've definitely worked with some of the older individuals who love to give you their opinions about everything. And I love that personally. I think it's amazing. And having them actually fill it out and be like, hey, you watch me do this all the time. Now it's your turn. And so I've had some friends and colleagues basically say, I actually gave that to my learner and had them teaching me how that would look for them. And so I love that because that took it to a whole dimension that I had never envisioned. But yeah, I think that it's really cool because we're already seeing a lot of generality with this one concept in particular, just as an example, used across different demographics and, how that could be applied. So yeah, anyway.
I know we've got a study loosely underway that'll probably be another couple
Yeah.
years in the working because piloting a new assessment takes time for our participants who are doing the labor of using it in their clinical practice. And we've gotten some feedback on that it has helped kind of frame from an autonomy perspective over independence. I've had success using it in my contract work. I work with TRICARE and it's been approved in 4 or 5 TRICARE plans at this point. Mind you, TRICARE requires multiple
Amazing.
assessments, but TRICARE has approved it, no questions on the assessment piece.
Which is a
They,
huge win
of course,
for our
had some
perspective.
questions about ADLs and things like that, and their bones to pick with that and how it's related to behavior. But as far as assessment, I've had it approved, and I know that folks avoid TRICARE because they're persnickety and don't like to approve off the wall types of things. So that's been my use. I've used it with a younger client, as well as some of the teens and tweens that I work with. But we're still waiting on a lot of feedback from that pilot study. But feedback that I've heard from friends or peers who have read it, were sharing that it kind of feels like being able to have this kind of conversation where we're digging into that just by reading the book and because some of the phrasing there of the difference between autonomy and independence and explaining that within the book of even not them using it necessarily in clinical practice yet, because some of the folks aren't BCBAs yet that I've gotten that feedback from that have okay, it's like having that on your shoulder of okay, when I'm thinking about goals and conceptualizing how to write them, it gives some language to that paradigm shift of let's move beyond, because I've worked with a lot of individuals who have co-occurring physical disabilities. Independence isn't and shouldn't that's a very Western white culture ideal, but it's not the ideal in every community. And autonomy is about driving how you live your life. But if I need support with XYZ thing, I should still decide how that support happens. Right. Even if I can't do the thing without that support. So thinking about folks, teenagers who need support with toileting or need support with hygiene, just because you're a teen and you're non-speaking and you can't physically do it yourself doesn't mean I have the right to just manhandle you.
Right.
Or person handle you. I don't know of a gender neutral term for that yet. So open to
handle,
corrections and ideas.
Can handle.
I should still be stopping and waiting hey, I'm going to do the next part. If you need more time, let me know. If you are ready, let me know. And whatever that communication looks like for that individual. Hey, so and so and so and so, these 2 different people are available to help you with your change or help you with this hygiene task. Who would you prefer? And sometimes those choices aren't available. You're home with mom and it's mom. Or you just went to the bathroom and need support, but there's also a tornado going. Sometimes it's not going to roll out perfectly. That tornado example is one
a really unfortunate example.
But it happens. Yeah, it's a reality.
It does.
Well, what do you do in that situation? I can't be gentle and affirming in that situation. I'm you both and. You can recognize the limitations. Hey, man, this isn't going to be pleasant, but I have to make sure you're physically safe in multiple capacities right now. Well, and own that, again, hey, this might be traumatic for both of us, but it's what has to happen. Presuming competence that there is value in sharing, I don't know. So I've gotten feedback around that being it helping people with reframing because we get stuck in that. Well, I don't know how to say that differently, so I just use this word.
That's not an excuse.
Here's some new words, and I'm very happy that that seems to have been helpful for some people on that front of like helping reframe and shape their language.
Yeah. And like to add to that piece that you were talking about so well, it's like we were talking about, it's going to be a never zero behavior. Behavior analysts tend to do this thing, and I'm not being accusatory, but we tend to see this extreme scale. It's like we want it to be a zero behavior. We want it to be 100% independent behavior. It may never be 100% behavior. Like, it's remembering that disability is dynamic and that it will always fluctuate. Like, there are some days, okay, so I actually have dysautonomia or POTS physically, and there are days that I can't stand in the shower. I have to sit in the shower. But then there are other days I feel fine. And so, like, understanding that for me, maybe I'll have 100% independence if I follow that task analysis that says I must stand in the shower. But whereas I get dinged for the day that I can't stand in the shower, that doesn't seem fair. So making sure that instead of having the rigidity of 0 or 100, which is what behavior analysts have historically tended to do, we're asking you to sit uncomfortably in the middle of that range as far as what works for that individual. And I think that that is finally, like when you were talking, Alexandra, I was like, finally, it makes sense to me in a visual way. We're asking people to be more ambiguous versus the rigid, and we're autistic. If we're asking for this, once again, this is one of my, Alexandra loves when I say this, if we're asking you to be more flexible because you're being too rigid, you need to listen, because we are very rigid in a lot of what we do, but that it's not binary. It can't be binary. And so because everybody's so different, the circumstances are different, and disability is also dynamic, it's really hard to put people into those boxes. And, that's a big thing that we definitely preach probably too much about. But if it helps with that visual, just hang out in the middle.
Yep. And that's something that like I bring into my own work with clients in helping parents understand that just had the I don't ever set or rarely set. I have in the past, but I've unlearned some of that like 100% for anything, because I was originally taught if it's safety, it needs to be 100%. But I don't do that. And I had that conversation with a parent this week in that, and I tend to frame demands or requests of clients in that, do you have capacity today to work on this thing? So we may have identified a skill that, hey, I've worked with teens who like, you ask them to read a paragraph and in their brain, it lands as, you want me to read this whole chapter book right now in the next 5 minutes. And that's why their reaction to the demand is so big, because their brain hears what, and I didn't ask you anything. And then the adult feels like offended or like accused of wrongdoing when you react that big. But it's really your brain made it a leap because of past learning history and with unrealistic demands. So then any demand feels unrealistic. But that same teen is now in college, right? Like they wanted to get somewhere, but every time like demands were involved, it just felt too much. So that was the thing that I helped work with the autonomy on, like, where do you want to be in life? Now, okay, what are the steps to get there? And there was a lot of like, well, I want to do this. And that assumption of it will require no work, effort, anything for me to do that. But then we would talk through it. And then he would like, okay, that's still effortful. And I don't like it enough to, okay, so we ended up getting somewhere where it's like, okay, you actually like this topic. Yes, it's hard. But there would be days where it's like, hey, I don't have the capacity to have this conversation. It's one that the teen or whomever wants to talk about, wants to work on the skill, but I have a migraine today, or I'm having a bad POTS day, or I'm really disappointed about something today, or any millions of things that make today not the day to tackle the conversation. And then they're not going to have that 100% score. And then we continue to profit off of that versus, hey, what's workable for you? Are you happy with where you're at?
Or just even how your day's going. Like, we all have bad days.
How do we get from the wrong side of the bed to the right side of the bed? If that's where we get today, great. The other goals can go out the window if they need to. Yeah. Flexibility. It's okay. Data is data. It's not people treat data as like this person's doing poorly, or they're not progressing, or they're having like, this isn't working. But then that like arbitrarily puts pressure on like, I hate rapid behavior change as a concept. And I say that that's not a wishy-washy belief or practice on my end. That's I mean that. I'm aiming for long term. So if we have months of low accurate data, I'm not concerned that what we're doing is not working. It's a metric, but it's only one metric. the anecdotal report from the client is also an important metric. The mediator skills and things like that kind of loop into like making that happen and prioritizing multiple streams of data versus just how high of a percentage accuracy are you getting on these arbitrary skills I assigned you, like that may or may not be meaningful to you.
I have one more question before we maybe kind of wrap up, and it might be related more to some of the research you're going to be doing to sort of validate and whatnot going in the future. Conversations I've had a lot on the podcast, especially related to some of these popular assessments in the world of early intervention, certainly that they don't consider the autistic perspective, but also that a lot of them don't consider a whole lot of other perspectives either.
Mm-hmm.
And that what we're finding a lot of folks having to do these days is essentially adapt the current assessments to make them more culturally responsive.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in part, I think,
Mm-hmm.
because generally the research that folks have done over and over and over again, and you think, 10, 20, 30, 100 studies on some of these things to show they're valid, would somewhere in there change up the subjects every now and then, the participants every now and then, to actually make them valid for a variety of cultures, but they never kind of got around to that. Can you tell me a bit about sort of how you've kind of considered sort of cultural responsiveness sort of beyond the neurodivergent perspective, and or how you're considering it in some of the sort of future work?
Big important question. Do you want me to start on that, or do you want to start on that?
Go ahead if you're okay with it.
I'm okay with whatever. I have nothing to hide. We had these conversations because we do fall into a privileged demographic ultimately. It's one of those things where we don't have the people, the representation, because it would require a lot to get all of that authorship onto the protocol. And so what we tried to do to compensate for that was to leave skills as open to context as possible. If attending to somebody involves direct eye contact, I think of basically anytime I've been pulled over by police. Unless I want to feel unsafe and disclose my diagnosis, I should probably mask and I should probably perform neurotypicality. And, I'm white. And so those very, very valid concerns of intersectionality come into play there, where it's like, okay, context is key here. So when would we teach this skill versus another time when we wouldn't teach this skill? What will keep you alive? What will keep you safe? What will keep you feeling emotionally secure? Whatever that question is in that regard, keeping those goals and those ideas as far as what that could look like for an individual is what we try to do. It's not perfect. And that's the thing. We're both very much in the school of we want our feedback. We want to hear what's working, what's not working, what we missed, what we could do better. And, it's actually funny. I've been kind of bothering our board for survey results from our presentation because we both very much value that. And so we admit we're not perfect. We admit that our perspective is only our perspective, but we've tried to keep that as open to additional perspectives as possible while also trying to create those waves of change. And I think that that's what's going to be so hard for some people, is because they're so used to seeing this is the skill, this is specifically how it must be taught, and this is how you meet the criteria. But our assessment isn't really that specific. It's going to require you to have to think and have to really apply those different variables in a way that you may not have had to do before. I'm hoping that it's new for people. But like you said, if individuals are having to modify these assessment protocols to begin with, then some of that work has already been started and done. It's just the difference is that we are trying to include the possibility for that modification and encourage it versus saying, this is the only view and I know you have to work with this, but this is all you get. So it's more about accessibility, availability, stuff like that. But like I said, I know that there are definitely things that we have not accounted for that hopefully we can in the future. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And kind of looping back to that idea that nothing any of us can do is ever going to be perfect, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't put it out. More people, hopefully it gives permission and uses that privilege to say, like, you can write another assessment, write it. I'll read it. I'll use it, depending, like, if there, like, it depends on the overall, like, alignment of values. But I'm not going to speak for walks of life that I don't have the lived experience for. But that creation of, or offering of space and that like vulnerability of, this isn't going to be a perfect resource. It can't be. It shouldn't be. I never want to be the end be all of anything. Like, no, I'm just one imperfect person. And I'm trying to stop striving for perfection. But that means we show up to the table with what we've got and recognizing our privilege and using that to hopefully, hey, there are no, like, help bring that idea of like, there are no roles. If like people who are traditional in the field aren't practicing, in my opinion, under best practices, but they're doing it and making their living off of it and doing what they want despite like evidence in the contrary, why shouldn't we show up and offer this alternative perspective that isn't going to be perfect either? It's like there's always your perspective, my perspective, and the middle, but none of us are in that middle. So it like recognizing the limitation of that privilege brings in that front, but also not going to like, I also don't want to be like tokenizing, right? So like Robin and I have that natural connection that is formed over time, and I collaborate with other people as well from different experiences, but you can't force, there's a harm in forcing things as well. So I don't know if that answers things well, but yeah, that it's a tension. It exists.
Mm-hmm.
A tension, not attention.
Yes.
That something I've talked about with Oswin and some with you too, Robin, like none of us are immune from causing harm. All of us cause harm. All of us have the capacity to be healers as well in our various communities. Recognizing that and addressing our own cognitive dissonance around like we're a care field, we're a helping field, so we only ever want to, like, we can't handle this concept that we might be causing harm, and that's where the conversation shuts down. No, I've hurt people, I'm sure. I might not. I'm the villain in some people's stories, I'm sure, and that's fine. It's not. I want to change my own. Like I want to be a decent human being, but there are people who are villains in my story that realistically neither of us has done anything objectively wrong. We just didn't get along. That kind of idea like comes into play in like putting forth imperfect work, of not trying to like take labor from other people, but also not wanting to completely sit out of the conversation, out of fear of, fear of being imperfect. Well, the fact is we're imperfect. Better to face it and own that in the work that you do.
And to be clear, that's separate from your intentions. Your intentions may
Yes.
be great. Your intentions may be the best that anybody could possibly come up with, but your actions can still cause harm. And especially if you're working with vulnerable populations, we know that neurodivergent learners are experiencing high rates of trauma from various sources because they are vulnerable. And so understanding that there are so many different layers that we may never fully see objectively and identify because we may not know that person's complex learning history, we could be causing harm without even realizing that we're causing harm just because of their specific circumstances that we may not be able to identify with. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify because it's so easy for people to feel that defensive reaction, totally valid, and say, well, I mean well. Yes, but that's different. That's completely separate. We know you're a good person, pat on the back, whatever, but that doesn't mean your actions are matching.
Intention and impact both matter, but somebody's intention is going to impact different people in different ways. So it's not binary. Very little is binary in life, So there's something that helps one person might harm another person in a different way, and like holding space for that reality that when people like, we can't just accommodate every sensory need because what if it conflicts with somebody else's sensory need? And that's why that's in that assessment. Your values may butt up against another value. Maybe that's a skill of recognizing who you're safe to be in community with and who is safe to be in community with you. And there's going to be limits there. And it's okay to have those limits and honor that. Like you do your work over there, I do my work over here if there's that conflict. And if there's not, like, great, open to more collaboration.
The final secret word is cuticle.
Well, it's a really neat protocol and something that's needed, and I'm glad you folks are brave enough to do the work and put something out there. If folks wanted to find this thing, where would they go?
Sixth and Center Publishing has it, and it should be available directly through the website. I can send a link if you need it, and if you could share it to the listeners if they want.
We'll put it in the show notes for sure. And then are you folks sort of available to, for support if folks are looking for sort of help, delivering this thing?
Yeah, definitely. Like, we need to find a better platform for this because I know a lot of people aren't on Facebook.
Right.
We did start like a Facebook active group for anybody who's looking for questions, which, many people are not feeling very brave right now because there's not a lot of conversation, but we at least want it to be accessible to people. So it's never going to hopefully be a situation where I want to reach out, I just have a question to clarify something or how you would do this, and you should hear back from us.
Yeah. I will admit that it takes me a while to get through my inbox sometimes, so I'm not a perfect communicator on that front because it's got like 7+ emails that I have to, like accounts that I have to reference through like the multiple jobs and things like that. But I think that you have been my LLC's email, which I tend to be focused on, since that's kind of like my personal inbox. I'm like, whatever, if I miss an email there, whatever kind of thing. But I try to be reachable.
Sure. Perfect. Great. Well, I know you folks have a lot of cool projects on the go in the future and hopefully some stuff getting published. So hopefully we can have you back to hear about more of your work. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Very grateful. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, I encourage you to check out these Behavior Speak podcast episodes. Episode 66, Analyzing the Public Behavior of Donald Trump, Novel ABA Research with Dr. Robin Arnall. Episode 28, Including Autistic People in Every Aspect of Autism Research with Dr. M. Mariel Casio. Episode 52, An Autistic Researcher's Perspectives on Neurodiversity, Autism, and Autism Research with Patrick Dwyer. Episode 45, Autistic Advocacy with Tiffany Hammond. And episode 179, Reforming ABA, a Framework for Behavior Analysts with Osmond Latimer and Hillary McClinton.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please follow us on Instagram @BehaviorSpeak.